Colossians 1, starting in verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions, rulers or authorities. All things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross. And you who once were alienated and hostile in mind, doing evil deeds, he has now reconciled in his body of flesh by his death, in order to present you holy and blameless and above reproach before him. If indeed you continue in the faith, stable and steadfast, not shifting from the hope of the gospel that you heard, which has been proclaimed in all creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, became a minister. This is the word of the Lord.
Thank you, Melinda. If we haven't met yet, my name is Josh. I'm one of the pastors here. Would love to change that today. So track me down afterwards. There in the lobby, would love to speak with you. Something happened that was a little bit out of context this morning, in that the last worship song in our set was sang directly to the Eagles by Brian. And I don't apologize for that so much as want to give you context if you're unaware of why that happened. So Brian and I had a bet a few weeks ago. If the Commanders beat the Eagles, I would be wearing a Commanders jersey right now to preach in. But if the Eagles beat the Commanders, which they did, and beat the Chiefs, just to remind us 2 weeks in a row of that, then he would be doing the Eagles chant. And so that's what that was for us this morning. In case you're first time visiting and you're wondering what that was all about, that was it right there, okay? I want to let you know, too, that if you experience anything today that you don't understand or that is intriguing to you, if you hear a fight song for an NFL team and that is perplexing to you and you have questions, let's chat. I would love to speak with you about that. We know that some of the things that we teach and preach and sing and pray can be confusing if you're just new to Jesus or just exploring religion, and it'll be our privilege to answer any questions that you might have about that. So don't be shy. We'd love to speak with you about any of that. Well, have you ever watched the State of the Union address given by the president? It's the one night, allegedly, that everyone in Washington puts their politics aside. Allegedly, right? And we all tune in to hear the most powerful man in the world and to hear what he has to say. And what happens on that night? Everyone comes to Washington, D.C., and they fill up the Capitol building. And think of that room in your mind's eye. It's filled with all of the who's who's of the world, all the dignitaries and the power brokers of our nation. And before it starts in that room, there's just so much energy and electricity. It's very, very noisy in the room. And then all of a sudden, when it's about to start, the back door is thrown wide open and this man comes out. But it's not the president, not yet. And if we're honest, we have no idea who this joker even is. You don't know his title, you don't know his rank, you don't know how he got there or anything significant about this guy. No one knows him. No one knows how he got to be the guy that opens the door in the back. No one knows who this dude is, and to be honest, no one even cares who this dude is. And then he projects his voice over the din in the room, and he says, "Mr. Speaker, the President of the United States." And all of a sudden, everyone in the room stands to their feet and they applaud as the president walks in. And he weaves his way through the crowd, shaking hands, fist bumps, nods, smiles, scowls, all the way up to the podium, right? And then what happens? Well, this morning, let's do what no one in that room has ever done. In our mind's eye, instead of looking up at the president on the podium, turn your mind's eye to the back of the room. And there's that dude. He's leaving the room as he closes the door. No one's going to remember him. No one cares. No one knows where that guy goes after that moment. Like, does he sit out in the lobby and scroll through Twitter? During the speech, does he grab an Uber to a local restaurant? No one knows. Why? Because all eyes up front on the POTUS. This morning, Anchor family, and really every Sunday morning, but especially this Sunday, I get to be that guy in the back, all right? I'm the guy who's gonna throw open the door of Colossians 1 and say, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus, the resurrected King of the universe. And then I'm gonna shut the door and make my way out. You can forget about me. I want to be like the 18th century German theologian who encapsulated his life's mission like this: preach the gospel, die, be forgotten. That's it. That is my mission in life. All eyes up front, not on us. That is my deep desire this morning. I want you to see Jesus in all of his beauty and glory and depth. And so let's take a few minutes to situate in context the words that Melinda just read for us. Maybe you remember from about a month ago that I compared Colossians to an iceberg. I think this is like a really helpful analogy for what we find in this letter from Paul and Timothy to the Colossian church. The structure of this letter is such that the first 2 chapters explore like beneath the surface of the Christian life. And then the final 2 chapters in this letter are designed to show you what life looks like when God's grace sort of floats to the surface and becomes visible in your ordinary, mundane life. And remember our word cloud from a few weeks ago that has all the words from this letter to the Colossians, but it ranks them, and you can see the rank by the size of the font that is used. So the most used word in this book is highlighted with the largest font. Remember, it's pretty easy to see what the theme of Colossians is, right? Christ is over and over and over again the theme in Colossians. And so this has been the theme for our whole series through this little letter. All of Christ for all of life. All of Christ for all of life. And so we are really going to hone in on that all of Christ piece this morning. We want to see Jesus for all that he is. And so this breaks down really practically in this letter. The point is that the depth of your hidden life with Christ, what you do when no one is looking with Jesus, the depth of your hidden life with Christ will determine what shows up on the surface of your life. In chapters 1 and 2, we're going to see Jesus for all that he truly is, all of Christ. And what we learn is that Jesus isn't like our mascot for the Christian life, okay? He's not your co-pilot, he's not your buddy, he's not your life coach, and he's not your homeboy. Jesus is the image of the invisible God, firstborn of all creation, creator of everything, the pre-existent, preeminent one, the sustainer of everything, the head of the church, the firstborn from the dead, the preeminent one in all of history, for all of time, and all of the world. And because of this, here has been our goal over the past few weeks and over the coming weeks. I want each of us to be able to say, because Jesus is so magnificent, we want all of Jesus affecting all of us. All of Jesus' teaching affecting all of our living. Ladies, he's affecting your tongues and the way you speak about other people here in this church family. Men, he's affecting your hearts and how tender and affectionate you are with your wives, whether or not it comes naturally to you or not. Kids, if you're in here, he's affecting obedience to your parents, whether you agree with their rules or not. Retirees, he's affecting the way you spend your sunset years and money. You name it, we want Jesus affecting it. Okay, so with this sort of 50,000-foot view of the letter, our iceberg in view, let's dive in here. It's important to remember that although Colossians was written for us, it was not written to us, so it's critical to do the best we can of crawling up into the mind and motives of the original author and to try to hear this the way the original hearers would have heard this and try to understand what was written from the perspective of the original audience. And one of the things that Paul is concerned about with these particular people in this city of Colossae, he's concerned about them bailing on Jesus because of some teaching that is infiltrating the church. Some teaching that is just like a few ticks off from what it should be. And so you can see this in verse 23. chapter 1, verse 23, Paul is concerned that they keep going in their faith, that they stay faithful and they stay on point with what they believe. He's concerned that they stay upright and stable. He talks about it like shifting. He's concerned that they not shift away from the faith. He's concerned that they not shift their hearts away from the primacy of Jesus in their lives. That word shift there in verse 23, that is important to Paul, is actually, might surprise you to hear, it's a passive word and not an active verb. In other words, he's not afraid that they're gonna walk from one end of the beach, like the safe end of the beach, to the dangerous end of the beach. That's not what he's talking about. That's not the idea that's behind that word shift. The idea behind that word shift is inaction, not action. So instead, he's afraid that we're gonna hop on a float in the ocean and just drift through inaction, letting the currents of our day just take us where they will. That's his concern about us, that we not be active in staying tightly gripped on to our faith in Jesus. So think about this. How great does something have to be for you to want to hold on to it for life? Like, how great would a house have to be for you to not envision any future upgrades to the house? Man, this house is just gonna be it for the rest of time. I'm just gonna be in it for the rest of my life. Maybe a couple of us have that kind of house, but most of us don't. We see things changing in our houses in the future. Or how great would a particular car have to be for you to say, man, this is it. This is gonna be the car I'm just always gonna drive. I love this thing. Or like maybe your wardrobe. Like, this is just what I'm always gonna wear, come what may. Our styles are so fickle, right? I feel like the minute I got comfortable in skinny jeans, now they're changing it up on us, right? We're back to baggy jeans again. You get the point. Here is the problem with this when it comes to our faith. You know, sometimes it fits great for a season for us, but like everything in life, we don't really expect it to last, to phase. And so we drift on to something else. But in this passage, Paul's saying, listen, I want you to grab hold of this magnificent Jesus by faith and never let him go. I don't want you to drift. And here's the thing that's never gonna wear out, is what Colossians says. Never gonna run dry, never gonna need renovating. So what he's doing in this passage is he's saying, hey, I wanna show you something that is so great, so magnificent that you should embrace it and never let it go. But he's concerned for us. He's concerned. He knows it's easy to treat Jesus like something that fit at one time, but it's easy to dump now that life is a little bit different, or maybe life is a little bit better. It's easy to let go of our faith or not hold it so tightly because the world starts to look attractive to us maybe, or because we start to experience some kind of disappointments in life. Of course, everyone wants protection from hell, right? We all want that fire insurance. So we grab the gospel, we make that initial investment. But it's hard to keep holding, right? In our day. Like, what about when hardship comes our way? That prayer that goes unanswered for a dear friend. The cancer news that just won't go away. Or a besetting sin that we just can't seem to shake. Then what? A flimsy gospel grab won't work in those moments. We need a strong gospel grip. But that grip around that gospel, around that Jesus, had better be worth it. What we get better be better than what we lose. Colossians 1 absolutely convinces us of that this morning. What we get in our gospel grip is so much better than all the other things that we have to let go of in order to grip this gospel. This passage is gonna lift Jesus up so high and really just show us why Jesus is worth everything. And what we're gonna do is just see this like avalanche of descriptions of Jesus, layer after layer after layer of beautiful descriptions of Jesus. And I hope what this does in me and what this does in you is that it stirs our affections this morning. That's it. Just want us to love Jesus a little bit more this morning. And that we say, yes, I wanna grab hold of this Jesus and I never wanna let go. So while Colossians is intensely practical in its final two verses, it's more theological in final two chapters. It's more theological in thinking in its first two chapters, chapter 1 especially, which we're honing in on this morning. So Paul doesn't really start where you might think he would in addressing all the stuff that we really need in order to live good and fruitful lives. He doesn't start with the tip of the iceberg that's exposed on the surface of our lives, the visible parts of our lives. In other words, he doesn't start by telling them to change their behavior, to stop doing this and to start doing that. That's not how he tries to fix them personally or collectively as a church. He starts beneath the surface in their hearts, at the core of their beliefs about Jesus. And what we find is that the solution to the ordinary problems in our lives starts with the primacy of Jesus in our hearts. That's why he has written this transcendent paragraph about Jesus. If we want the tip of the iceberg, the visible parts of our lives to be what they should, we've got to get the part beneath the surface right. We've got to see Jesus in all of his beauty and be so transformed by it and transfixed by it. So in this way, a robust understanding of the beauty and glory of Jesus becomes like an anchor that keeps us from drifting from the truth. The bigger and heavier the anchor, the better chance we have to keep from shifting. This is why verses 15 through 20 are so explosive, so huge, and just so heavy in the good kind of way, the sobering kind of way, the beautiful kind of way. It would not be an exaggeration to say that this is one of the greatest paragraphs ever written in the history of the world, which is why I stole this from the guy who's preaching next. So I preached the first 14 verses. Theoretically, Matt Fretwell should have preached the next few verses, but I wanted these verses. So I kept them for myself and let Fretwell skip ahead. And then Josh Earls last week skip ahead even further. That's why we're coming back to chapter 1, okay? Next week we'll get back, or not even next week, because we'll be meeting with another church next week because we don't have access to the space. But in 2 weeks from now, we'll pick back up where we left off. But I wanted the greatest paragraph ever known to mankind, okay? So selfish of me, I know, but here we go. Here's the big idea for us, all right? The supremacy of Christ is the anchor for your life. I didn't really mean for it to rhyme this morning, but it kind of does, all right? The supremacy of Christ is the anchor for your life. And I know this because what follows on the heels of this passage, like Matt Fretwell spoke on this a few weeks ago for us. What follows the teaching here about the richness of Jesus? We find teaching about the misery of suffering. This teaching about Jesus here is an anchor while we are suffering. Later in the letter, he talks about some questionable teaching that is infiltrating the church. So what anchors us in moments when our faith is under threat? This heavy truth about Jesus. Then he gets to the mundane moments of life, in home, at work, in our church relationships. What helps us travel through those mundane things with grace? This heavy truth about Jesus. So all this heady doctrine is designed to help us stay anchored to Jesus in the miserable and mysterious and mundane moments of our lives. This morning, I just want to highlight 2 things about Jesus that are driven out of the text here. And so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Jesus the Christ. Just as the foundation to our Christ this morning, I want us to check out that first phrase there in verse 15. It says, Jesus is the image of the invisible God. Maybe you know that God, as spirit, is invisible, but Jesus came to make the invisible visible. So this last week, just on a whim, but in preparation for this message, I asked ChatGPT to show me what Josh Hurst from Virginia Beach looks like. And it answered surprisingly, specifically and accurately. It said this: Josh Hurst is the lead pastor and elder at Anchor Church in Virginia Beach, overseeing organizational direction, teaching, communication, administration, and leadership development. He was installed as the lead pastor 1.3 years ago. So far, so good. And incredibly accurate. I don't know how it knew that 1.3 thing. Kind of creepy, but it knew. But then, ChatGPT, it showed me an image of myself. And here's what it gave me. I'm going to put the whole screenshot on screen so you can see it. So you know I'm not making this up. That's a screenshot from my phone. In all seriousness, if you want to know what God looks like, don't ChatGPT him. Okay, I actually did that this week too, and it was frightening. If you want to know what God looks like, you look at Jesus. He makes the invisible God visible, and it's way more of an accurate representation of God. Jesus is way more accurate than ChatGPT is with me. Hebrews 1:3, Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. This is the foundation of all that is to come. Jesus is God. Paul has laid that foundation. And so like a great portrait, Jesus shows us the true likeness of God. Want to know what God likes and hates and loves and values? Read the Gospels closely. Read Jesus closely. That's the starting place, the foundation. And a few things flow out of this reality that we should touch on this morning. As God, Jesus is the firstborn of creation. So we owe him our unshifting allegiance. Jesus is the firstborn of creation, so we owe him our unshifting allegiance. We've already talked about the concern about us not shifting away from Jesus, but this idea of firstborn can really trip us up here, I think, if we're not careful. To our ears, 2,000 years later, this may sound like Jesus was born first or created first. But Jesus is the holy, uncreated one. So what do we do with firstborn here? Well, verse 16 can help provide some clarity here. If you just skip one verse down, verse 16 says that all things were created in him. So we can already tell that firstborn cannot mean that he himself was created because he created all things. So while to our modern ears, firstborn sounds like born first, right? The meaning this word came to have in the ancient world is much deeper and richer. Speaking not to the sequence of birth, but rather to the rank of importance. It does not speak to sequence and birth. It speaks to rank of importance. Here's another, fortifying example from Psalm 89. The psalmist writes this about David. He says, "And I will make him," David, the firstborn, "the highest of the kings of the earth." Well, we know from history that David wasn't the firstborn in his family, and yet he was given firstborn privileges, as it were. He was given the rank of firstborn, even if he wasn't born first in the sequence of his siblings. So, in Paul's day, this idea that is translated as firstborn can speak to sequence, but in Paul's mind, it speaks to rank. Jesus ranks first for all of us in creation. Make sense? Hope you're tracking with me on that. And so think about the first in ranks in our society today. Who's like a first rank actor? Just call it out for me. First rank actor. Daniel Day-Lewis. Did you hear that, Josh Earls, if you're in here? Daniel Day-Lewis up here. Was that you that said it? Oh, it was you? I thought you normally sit in the back row Baptist. There you are, Daniel Day-Lewis. All right, a first-ranked musician. Olivia Camp, I'll do it for you. There you go. How about like a first-rank entrepreneur? Who's out there that we would all know? Bill Gates, there you go. First-rank politician. Wait, don't do that, please. If I asked you these questions, though, like a decade ago, all the answers would have been different, maybe aside from Daniel Day-Lewis, okay? If I ask you 10 years from now, Daniel Day-Lewis will not be a first-rank actor. All the answers will be different. So last week, I was with my dad, helping him recover from some surgery. Some of you have asked. He's doing much better than he was. Thankful for that. And we were watching this documentary about the 1992 Dream Team, which was like allegedly the best basketball team ever assembled. And it dawned on me while I was watching that these dudes are all in their 60s now. The Dream Team, these guys are in their 60s. I mean, I would probably beat some of those guys at this point. Probably not. But one can hope and dream and believe. Any current NBA player, though, would smoke any of those guys on that Dream Team. Why? Our glory fades. Our rank tarnishes. It has an expiration. But Jesus' never has, and it never will. He is the firstborn, the preeminent one of all creation. He ranks first. And so with Jesus as the firstborn, the preeminent one over all creation, this makes him the authority of the church. The authority of the church. Verse 18, check it out. And he is the head of the body, the church. And so because this church thing, is Jesus' idea, he's got ownership rights to it from top to bottom and all the way in between. Not me, not you, not anybody but Jesus. It's his thing. And he left us his book, and it's going to own us because Jesus is the authority. He is the first in rank. And because his word owns us and not the culture, you'll probably see us taking stands from time to time that are increasingly unpopular in our day. I'm not going to list them all right now. Some of them are probably ticking off in your brain right now, but just know that the book is our boss because Jesus is the authority. I don't say this because I like being a lightning rod. I don't. I don't love the idea of being culturally divisive. It's because we are not our own. We were bought with a price. Jesus ranks first, and so we will honor him as the head of the church. As firstborn, Jesus is the authority of all creatures. We see this in verses 16 and 17. I promise I'm not going to do this every single week, but if you were to drop verses 15 to 20 into a word cloud generator, you get a sense for how wide-ranging his authority is. Check this out. You can see the most important word in all of those words in verses 15 to 20 is all. It appears 8 times in these 6 short verses. It is the thread that sort of like ties all of these verses together. This is in part why we've called this series All of Christ for all of life, all of Jesus affecting every last inch of us. So in a word, how do we describe Jesus' authority? All, everything. It's everything. It's your phone. It's your speech. It's your love life. It's your private walk and your public persona. Look at verse 16. Jesus is the authority in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities. What do you think the primary meaning is of these pairs in verse 16? A few pairs in there. In heaven and on earth, visible, invisible, thrones, dominions, rulers, authorities. Here's the answer. What Paul is doing here is demonstrating that Jesus truly is Lord of all, even Lord over Satan and his demonic powers. We might be tempted to say, when we read a list like that in verses 16 and 17, oh, Jesus is authority over all? Like he's even the authority over Satan and all the darkness and the brokenness and the death in our world right now? We might suspect that if there were any part of reality that wasn't in, through, and for Jesus, it would be one of those things. But the answer is no, not even them. Jesus is the authority over them. So whatever questions you have this morning, and we all bring questions in about Jesus, whatever questions you have, whatever doubts you might have about the utter, extensive sovereignty of Jesus, this text says, yes, that too. Yes, that too. It's all under the authority of Jesus. As R.C. Sproul would say, there are no maverick molecules in the universe. Whereas one guy, his name is Abraham Kuyper, said, there is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine. Like water through a crack, Jesus' authority seeps everywhere and covers everything and everyone. There's nowhere it doesn't reach. Do you really believe this morning about your pain? Like that he in some way has authority over this? It can be a hard pill to swallow. It can also bring comfort. If God knows how to take the most unjust, worst pain and suffering this world has ever encountered, right there at the cross, and he knows how to untangle it to make sense of it for us, surely he can do that for us in our own pain and mystery. Even if at present, we can't seem to find any good reason for a senseless shooting in our city or a rogue disease in our body. Do you believe that Jesus is the authority over everything in our lives? Or do you really believe this about yourself? Jesus looks at you and says, that was mine. If you see Jesus for who he truly is, that Jesus calls you his, is a comfort. Like, I love being his. I'm so glad he looks at me and says, Josh, mine. But if you just want to do you in this life, it's going to sound like a threat to you this morning. In a world that is bent on its own way, Anchor family, let's not get this twisted. The highway to hell is lined with people cheering each other on saying, you do you. No, Jesus is the authority, the beautiful, generous, righteous authority. He's the preeminent one of all of history for all of time, and we owe Jesus all of our allegiance. And as we wrap up this first point, I want you to know that I got out of control with my alliteration, okay? I just couldn't help myself. And so as the firstborn, Jesus is the authority of the church. He is the authority of all creatures, and I had to have an A and a C. So I said Jesus is the adhesive of all creation, okay? And here's what I mean. You can look at verse 17. I don't even think it's that bad of a stretch, all right? It says, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the adhesive. He is the linchpin for all of history and all of time. Without joists, our homes won't hold together. Without glue, our books won't bind together. They'll just be pages with no binding. And listen, Anchor family, without Jesus, the universe collapses. Hebrews 1:3 tells us that Jesus didn't just create us, he is right now sustaining this whole thing. Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God in the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Listen, I know it feels like things are falling apart, like the adhesive is off the binding, and that we've lost the plot and lost the order of the pages. Maybe we have, but Jesus hasn't. He is sustaining this thing by the word of his power. And this is one of those things that's got to anchor us when times are good and when times are bad. He's holding it all together. Okay, so Jesus is the firstborn of all creation, so we owe him our unshifting allegiance. And Jesus is the firstborn from the dead, so we trust him for peace with God. It's our second point this morning. Paul wasn't watching reruns of The Walking Dead when he wrote this about Jesus being the firstborn from the dead. Jesus is the founder and sustainer of creation, but he's also the founder and sustainer of a new creation, namely the church. And remember what this firstborn idea means, right? It means he is first in rank for all who are dead or will die. He's the firstborn from the dead, the preeminent one for all who are dead or will die. This is all of us. Some of us meet our death sooner than others, but of all of us who have died or will die, Jesus is ranked first. And why? He ranks first because he's the only undefeated one against death. He beat death. And what makes him especially preeminent here for us who need hope in a life that is racked with death? He offers his victory over death to any who seek it. How does he do this? Well, let's take a step back. What is this thing that we call death that we try to avoid at all costs? It's the downstream effect of sin in our world. If there was no sin, there would be no death. Sin separates us from God, and eventually it separates us from life itself, right? So if we are to overcome death, like Jesus, we need this gulf to be bridged. We need to be reunited with Jesus. Look at verses 19 and 20. For in Jesus, all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things. Here it is. How does this gulf get bridged? By the blood of his cross. So that word reconcile there is going to be really important for us. It's a key word to pay attention to. If you hear of a divorced couple that has now reconciled, what does that mean? It means that they've reunited, right? So through our sin, we have been divorced from God, and the only way to reconcile with God is through Jesus. And here's why we hold to Jesus so tightly, Anchor family, because he reconciles us with the Father. And how does he do it? Look back again at verse 20. He reconciled to himself all things, making peace by the blood of his cross. Look at verse 22. He reconciled us in his body of flesh by his death. And so here we get this crazy exchange that happens between us and God. Jesus on the cross being treated like we should be treated, and we in heaven being treated like Jesus should be treated. This is what makes Jesus so preeminently awesome, first in rank. He is the guy who died, but didn't just die, was humiliated, tortured naked, exposed and ashamed, all on the cross for what? To make peace between us and God. He helps us be right with the offended party. He alone bridges this gap for us. He is the firstborn from the dead, and we need to be united with him. I read this incredible story this last week that I hope will illustrate this for us, and then we'll close our time together. This guy's name was Matt Swatzel. He was a 20-year-old firefighter and an EMT back in 2006. He had just wrapped up a 24-hour shift, and he was driving home. He was about 4 minutes from home when he dozed off. In the next instant, he heard the worst sound that he's ever heard in his life. That's how he described it. It was this crunch of a head-on collision with a 30-year-old woman and her 19-month-old daughter. The woman dies instantly. We find out later that she was pregnant, so her unborn child dies as well. Miraculously, this 19-month-old daughter survives. But think about Matt. His life is over. As a 20-year-old, his life, as he knows it, is over. He has killed a woman and her baby and wrecked her husband for the rest of his life. But then the story shifts over to Eric, the woman's husband. And we find out that Eric is a Christian. And you know what Eric did? Right away, he said that, you know what? I really need to pray for Matt. I want to pray for Matt, this guy who unintentionally, but still killed my wife. I'm gonna pray for him. I want to see if I can get to a place in my heart where I can encourage him and see if I can get to the spot where I can actually forgive him. At some point, Eric says, you know, I don't want this to ruin another life. I don't want this moment in time to ruin Matt's life for the rest of time. So he actually goes to the courts and he appeals for a reduction in Matt's sentence. And here's where the story turned wild, for me at least. On the 2-year anniversary of the accident, Matt and Eric run into each other in the parking lot of a grocery store where Matt had just bought a card to send to Eric to ask him for his forgiveness. And before Matt could get that card in his car and take it home and write on it, before he could even send it to Eric, Eric saw him and he went toward him, but not with his fists up, with his arms open like this. And he was sobbing and he wraps his arms around Matt and he says, I forgive you. I forgive you. This moment in the parking lot kicked off a friendship that continues to today, as far as I understand the story, almost 20 years later. They started going to Waffle House every 2 weeks together. They started eating together and befriending one another and building a relationship. This is a picture of them at the grave, which they would go back to from time to time. Matt on the left, Eric on the right. Listen, that kind of reconciliation happens only if Eric says, I will bear the cost of forgiving you, because every time I'm with you, I have to think about everything that I've lost. Every time they're together, he's thinking about what he lost. Forgiveness is not easy. It is costly, right? You know this in your personal relationships. It takes a lot to forgive. But there's literally nothing that Matt could have done. No amount of I'm sorry cards, no amount of money, no amount of nothing could bridge that gap and make them friends. But Eric says, no, I want to pursue you. I want to be your friend, and I want you to know that I am here for you. I want to have Waffle House with you. This is what Jesus is doing for us, friends. Reminds me of that moment in the story that Jesus tells about the prodigal son, right? My favorite story in all of the Bible. When the father and son are finally reconciled, the stink of sin and pigs all over his son, and the father's love overwhelming the stench of that sin. Like Eric, the father takes on the weight of the offense. No fists up, just arms open. He's like, I got this. He does not let the son carry that guilt and shame. More than that, he doesn't even let him sit in that shame for even a blink. No shame, just a party, just a warm embrace. He's saying, I'm not waiting until you pay off your debt. There's no probation. You don't have to execute on a series of commands to get back in my good graces. I am covering your rebellion with my love. I'm simply going to take you back into the family with full rights as a son. You need to know this morning that the firstborn from the dead does not hold you at arm's length. He draws you near to reconcile. So if you are drowning in shame this morning about something you did this weekend, can you just know that the firstborn from the dead is there with you and for you? Do not pay for again what Jesus already paid for. Be released from that. He draws you near to reconcile you with the Father by the blood of his cross. Ladies and gentlemen, Jesus, the resurrected King, the firstborn over creation, the firstborn from the dead, the anchor for your life in the mundane, the mysterious, and the miserable moments. Hold on to Jesus because he is worth everything. I know it's hard. I know it. I know there are lots of things that pull you in so many different directions, but hold on to him. He's worth it. He's worth everything. The supremacy of Christ is the anchor for your life. So come to this Jesus. Come to all of him. Man, we barely had time to just like a little spade work. This passage is like the Grand Canyon deep. Do your own work. Own your own growth. Go back through 15 to 20 sometime this week and really dig in. Own your growth. Cozy up to this Jesus and get to know how magnificent he is. And let him seep into every part of all your life, all of Christ for all of life. Let me pray. Jesus, you are so big and magnificent and beautiful. We can't possibly take you all in. But we love you and want to worship you and let you into every part of our life. I pray that you'd help us do that. Amen.